Well, we'll go ahead and begin, but thank you so much for coming. I hope that you had a great weekend and you're ready to kick off the week with us here and chat a little bit about decision education. So thank you for being here and welcome. We all want students to make good choices. That's something that you hear a lot of when you are around adults and children. But what exactly does it mean to be good at decision making? And how exactly do we help students and empower them to be effective decision makers? That's what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to begin by talking about why that's important. So imagine that I'm going to give you a few statements, and I would love to hear the degree to which folks agree or disagree with this. So if you're an educator of sorts, think of the students that you support. If you are a parent or guardian, think of the kids in your own home, and think about the degree to which these statements feel true or not true. My students have the information they need and are prepared to decide what they should do after high school, college, trade school, military, etc. And if they're going to go to college, they have a sense of which college they'd like to go to. To what extent does that feel true or not feel true? You can share thoughts, or you can sort of just think about it in your own mind. Think about that. Think about my students eat foods that effectively balance their short-term happiness and their long-term health. To what extent does that feel true to you and the young people that you work with? My students have the media literacy skills to avoid being duped by online scams or misinformation. Does that feel true to you or not quite true? And when my students get upset, they have the ability to stop and consider their responses before acting impulsively. And when we put it in terms of those contexts, we can see that students are making decisions all the time, and many of us may feel like they need to perhaps improve in the quality of decisions that they make. Think about a day in the life of a high school junior. The alarm goes off first thing in the morning, and right away, the student is faced with a decision. Are they going to hit snooze or are they going to get up? Then they get out of bed and need to decide what outfit they're going to wear for the day. When they get in the car to drive to school, they notice that their tire pressure light is on and they need to decide, are they going to stop and put air in their tires, or are they going to just drive to school and deal with that later? In first period, their teacher asks them to select a partner, and they have a choice. Should they partner up with their best friend, who they enjoy spending time with, or they see the smartest kid in the class is right to their left? Should they partner up with the smartest kid in the class? In second period, their friend tries to talk to them in the middle of the teacher's lecture. And the student knows they're not supposed to talk while the teacher is talking, but they don't want to appear weird or just sort of ignore their friend. So they have to sort of grapple with what they're going to do when their friend tries to talk to them. In third period, they see somebody cheating on an exam and have to decide what they're going to do about witnessing this. During lunch, their friends are pestering this person to decide who they are going to ask to prom. In fourth period, they're asked to select a topic for the science fair competition. In fifth period, they really have to use the restroom, but they know the teacher gets really mad if they ask to use the restroom and have to be excused from class. So they're debating what to do there. After school, their mom wants to know if they're going to retake the ACT or if they're satisfied with their score. And then later that day, their friends are going to the movies, but they have an exam tomorrow. So should they go to the movies or should they stay in and study? The point of this is that students are making countless decisions all day long. And I gave an upper high school example, but it's equally true for students of all grade levels. So I think frequently about the time that I met with um, we have a community garden here where I live, and we were out there doing some gardening work, and there was a kindergarten student, and her hands were just covered in blisters. And I said, "Sweetheart, what is going on? Like, what is happening?" Because she couldn't even shovel, she couldn't even use any of the tools. I said, "What is happening?" And she said that she really liked hanging out with her best friend during recess time, but all her best friend wants to do is hang on the monkey bars. So she wants to be with her friend, but she's forced to hold these monkey bars all day in order to hang out with her friend, and didn't know what to do and had all these blisters. And so we talked about how, okay, you've got multiple values and you value your friendship with this particular child, but you also clearly value your health, and this is having an adverse effect on your health. And so trying to decide and decipher what to do. So whether you're a kindergarten student debating whether or not to hold onto the handbars, or you're a high school student trying to decide what you're going to do after graduation, or anywhere in between, our young people are faced with an enormous amount of decisions each and every single day. Most of us don't think much about how we make decisions. That said, there are multiple fields in the sciences and humanities demonstrating that we can get better at making decisions through learning and practice. So if we start putting these pieces together a little bit, here's kind of where we're at. And the reason it's important is because our life outcomes are made up of two things: chance and the quality of our decisions. Our life outcomes are the result of combination of chance and the quality of our decisions. Though we can't control chance, we can teach students how to make better decisions. We're going to talk more about that in a little bit. But when you add it all up, here's where we stand. Students of all grade levels face a multitude of decisions every day, some really big and some really small. As they age into adulthood, the importance of decision making persists, both in personal endeavors and professional settings. So not only are they making decisions right now, but they're also going to use decision making skills for the rest of their lives. As they age, they're going to decide what state to live in, what jobs to take, whether to buy a house or rent one, whether who they want to date, who they want to marry, all the big things that come with life, they're going to be deciding those things. Additionally, in the professional setting, their employers are going to demand that they are effective decision makers. We have a council of workforce leaders at the Alliance for Decision Education, and they are constantly telling us, both really large businesses and small businesses are telling us they are insisting that their employees have a certain degree of discernment. So you have students who are facing many decisions right now, and they're going to use decision-making skills for the rest of their lives. There are the way that these decisions are handled, along with chance, will determine their life outcomes. So it really does have really big consequences. And there is an interdisciplinary approach that we can use to help people make decisions more effectively. If you add all that up, it leads to a pretty clear conclusion. We should ensure that decision education is part of every student's learning experience. So students are making all of these high stakes choices, and we have research that tells them how to make decisions more effectively. It makes sense to me that we take that research and give it to students so that they can make really good, effective decisions. So perhaps by now you are convinced that in addition to teaching students how to calculate the Pythagorean theorem, or the difference between similes and metaphors, or any historic date, in addition to all of that really important content, students also need to know how to make good, effective decisions, and we can teach them how to do that. So now you may be deciding, okay, I want to help my students make good decisions, or I want to help my own kids make good decisions. Um, you may be inclined to think that making good decisions is just having them do one particular thing, or select one particular outcome, or one particular choice. But as we'll see in a little bit, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And so to help us understand that point, let's think through a quick thought experiment. you may be inclined to do this. You may be inclined to say, I want to see if my students are making good choices. So here's what we're going to do in this thought experiment. We're going to get a vending machine and we're going to fill it with candy bars. We're going to fill it with apples. And we're going to put it in a hallway behind double paned glass. So we're going to be behind a mirror and they're not going to be able to see us. And we're going to be able to observe students in their natural habitat, right? And we're going to see them come up to this vending machine and make a choice. You may be inclined to believe that if the students choose the apple, that we can say, yes, our students make good choices. We have good decision makers at this school because they all chose the apples and we were standing behind and we could see that they picked the apples. And if you see a whole bunch of students go up and select the candy bar, you might think, oh gosh, we've got a lot of work to do. Our students aren't making good choices. They're all picking the candy bars. But it's way more complicated than that. And as we'll share, the apple doesn't necessarily indicate a good choice, and the candy bar doesn't necessarily indicate a bad choice. This is because skillful decisions are values driven. For an average person of average health who is trying to be as healthy as they can be, then it's true. The apple is generally a healthier alternative to candy bars in most situations. But that isn't universally the case. What if a student has braces? They might not be able to eat the apple. What if a student has diabetes or might need their sugar levels regulated? And in that case, actually the candy bar is the better choice than the apple. Or what if somebody doesn't really care as much about health as they do about wanting something that tastes really, really good? The point of this is skillful decisions cannot be determined based solely on the outcome that somebody selects, but instead should align to the values that we hold. Several years back, Simone Biles, the very famous gymnast, decided to take some time off of gymnastics. And when she did this, the internet exploded. And there was a lot of people saying that she made a really bad choice. And a lot of people said, if I was in her position and I had the level of talent that she had, I would have just ground myself into the ground and just done absolutely everything humanly possible until I physically couldn't do gymnastics anymore. And she didn't do that. She stepped away when she was at a peak level, eventually came back, but said that she was stepping away. And again, the general consensus of the internet at the time was that was a really, really bad choice. Well, if you value getting as many wins at that particular point in her life as possible, then yes, stepping away and not doing it was indeed a bad choice. But it's important to remember that she may have had other values in addition to wanting to be really, really strong in her sport. She may have been thinking about her own health and well-being. She may have been thinking about her family. She may have been thinking about her long-term ability to perform gymnastics, not just in that exact moment. There could have been many, many things going through her brain. And before we determine whether that was a good decision or a bad decision, we would need to know the values that she held. I think this is important to keep in mind. And so imagine that you are at your school and your school counselor comes up to you and says, I'm just so frustrated with little Susie because I've been working with little Susie for months. Little Susie got into both prestigious large university and small local college. And I've been trying very, very hard to get her to understand that the good choice is the large prestigious university. And I'm just so frustrated because is picking the small local college. And what a terrible decision maker little Susie is. Hopefully by now you're beginning to realize it's not quite that simple. And perhaps she made a terrible decision by picking small local college, but perhaps not. We would need to know more about what little Susie's values are before we determine whether that is an evaluation. Oh, Katrina, very good point. Yes, sorry, I do refer to student as little Susie, but don't mean to be
Not
pejorative.
that wasn't directed at you. That was the hypothetical person. Like
Oh, okay.
if you want her to respect what you're saying, maybe stop calling her little Susie.
Yes, 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 yes. Good point. Good point. Good point. But yeah, we have to just be thinking about how skillful decisions are value driven. The other thing to keep in mind is that we all have different risk tolerances. So if we go back to our vending machine situation, a lot of us know it's not good to eat chocolate all the time. But for me, for one person, if there's just a 1% chance that they're going to get a cavity, they're going to stay away from the candy bar no matter how delicious it tastes. For somebody like me, I love chocolate, and I apparently don't value my oral hygiene as much as I should. I'm willing to tolerate a lot of risk when I'm deciding whether I'm going to eat that candy bar because I just love chocolate that much. And so, in addition to the fact that we value different things, we're also willing to tolerate different risk levels. Additionally, we all have multiple values. So far, I've been framing this as, do you value health or do you value taste? But in reality, it's not that simple. You probably, to some degree, value both health and you value taste. You also probably value, you may have brand loyalty and you want to get a particular snack. You may value, um, the convenience, how long it takes to eat, and your values will change in different contexts. If you're running from meeting to meeting and you see a vending machine, you might pick one choice. But if you're maybe at an airport and you have a 3 hour layover and nowhere else to go, you may pick another choice. And so skillful decisions are value driven. We all have different risk tolerances, and we have multiple values at the same time, not just one value. Additionally, decisions compound over time. So maybe for you, you value health, and for you, the generally healthy consensus is the apple. And so for you, generally picking the apple is a good choice. However, maybe you buy something from the vending machine every single Friday. Maybe 51 weeks out of the year, you're going to buy the apple, and maybe one Friday, you're going to purchase the candy bar. That one candy bar for most people is not going to be a huge make or break deal. But if you think I want to purchase the apple and you find yourself every single week purchasing the candy bar and you're like, why am I doing this? That's when it might be a little bit of a problem. And I think the thing that I think about when I think about decisions compounding over time is it reminds me that we will never, ever, ever be perfect. Many people who even study this professionally, they've done research studies, they will all say that they find themselves guilty of making what they later realize was a bad decision. Um, but if we can just improve in the way that we make decisions by even 5%, because those will compound over time, that will lead to really, really, really positive results. And so they compound over time. And then lastly, resulting refers to our tendency to equate the quality of a decision with its outcome. This is really difficult for a lot of us to wrap our brains around. So we so often, when we're deciding, was that a good choice or was that a bad choice? We think, did it turn out well or did it not turn out well? But in reality, it's not quite that simple. So I'm going to give a quick example. Imagine you are driving your car and you are approaching a traffic light, and you can see the light is green, but you can see that it is changing from yellow to red. Imagine you ignore that fact and you plow right through that intersection, even though it has turned red, and you go right through it. Imagine by some extreme fortune that you don't hit anybody, there's no accidents, there's no police officer there, you do not get a ticket, there's no red light camera, you just go right through this traffic light and nothing bad happens to you. There are no bad consequences, and in fact, there's only good news because you got to go through the red light and didn't have to wait at that red light. That's not an entirely unrealistic scenario happening, but would any of us call that a good decision? I don't think any of us would refer to driving through that red light as a good decision, even though it had a good outcome. On the other hand, imagine you are driving that car and you can see the light change from green to yellow to red. So you stop at the red light and you're sitting there for a second. And about, 10, 20 seconds later, someone else slams their car behind you. They were texting on the phone. They didn't see that the light had changed. So you were sitting at the car and they slammed right into the back of you. Now, that's a bad outcome, but I don't think any of us would suggest that that person made a bad choice, right? Like, we wouldn't suggest that in the future you should just always blow red lights on the off chance that somebody comes and hits you from behind. So what we're seeing here is that, again, the outcomes are determined by both chance and the quality of our decisions. So sometimes we can make a really, really good decision, and unfortunately, it doesn't turn out very well. That is a unfortunate fact of life, but it is how life works. On the other hand, sometimes we can make a really poor decision, but by great fortune, it can turn out very promisingly. And so it's important to keep in mind that we should be evaluating our decision-making processes, not just the outcome, because the process we have in our control. So if a student were to tell you, my gosh, I didn't study at all for our test and I just came in and I aced it. I'm just going to continue like that's good choices. Like I'm just going to continue to not study because I'm going to do very, very well. We might suggest to that student that that wasn't the best decision-making process because maybe they just got lucky this one particular time when in the future, if they follow that same decision-making process, the bad luck can kind of catch up with them. So we want people to be thinking about the process that they make. So if you put all these pieces together, that skillful decisions are values driven, that we all have different risk tolerances, that we have multiple values at the same time, sometimes competing values, that decisions compound over time, and that resulting refers to our tendency to equate the quality of our decisions with the outcomes. What it means is we can't evaluate whether somebody is a good decision maker or a bad decision maker by which choice they selected, or even how well the situation turned out. Instead, it's not about what you think, but how you think. So if we equip students with all the decision-making skills that they need to be effective, and that ultimately leads them to pick the candy bar, then great. If it ultimately leads them to pick the apple, then great. If it ultimately leads them to find another choice altogether, then that's great too. So it's not just about what you think, but getting students to have a good, effective decision-making process. So what are the elements of making good decisions that lead into this good, effective decision making? At the Alliance for Decision Education, we bundle all the skills and knowledge and mindsets that determine good, effective decision making into four what we call domains. So the first of our domains is recognizing and resisting cognitive biases. So our brains have been wired over millennia to have certain heuristics or shortcuts or thought patterns that mean that we don't have to constantly uh, overthink every single thing that we have to do. We can sort of run on autopilot a little bit. And that is an incredible blessing for us. It enables us to do a bunch of really complicated things without overanalyzing it. But sometimes it can lead us astray. And the ways that it can kind of lead us astray is can affect the decisions that we make every single day. So if there's one cognitive bias that the general public has heard of or is aware of, many people have heard of the confirmation bias, for example, where you tend to seek out information that confirms what you already believe, and you sort of ignore or downplay potentially contradictory information. That affects the choices that you make because if you believe that that so and so would be a great person to date, and you know you may be interested in this person, you might over the course of the next week notice all the really great things that this person does, and you may downplay or ignore the potential red flags that can kind of get in the way. And then that might cause you to approach this person to potentially go on a date when in reality that might not be a really good decision. That's just one sort of silly example, but there are close to 200 known biases that affect our decision-making process in this way. And it is unlikely that we will ever be able to completely eliminate those cognitive biases from our brains, even if we wanted to. And we probably don't want to because a lot of them are good for a lot of situations. But that said, we do have to recognize that sometimes they can lead us astray in the decision-making process. And so one set of skills that we want to empower and equip students with is the ability to recognize and resist cognitive biases in these appropriate settings. That's the first domain. The second strand is about valuing and applying rationality. And this includes many of the sub-skills that you see listed on your screen now. So, are students intellectually humble? Are they actively open-minded? Are they truth-seeking? A lot of times we make decisions based on what we really want to be the case, even though we're not objectively looking at the situation. Do they have self-awareness? Do they have the ability to self-regulate? Do they have good habits that they can fall back on? And do they apply scientific reasoning to problem solving and decision making skills? Can we do a small experiment to see how this goes and then, maybe go from there? Um, so those are the skills that are included in our domain of valuing and applying rationality. For thinking probabilistically, this is where numeracy skills help enhance the decisions that we make. So again, applying numeracy skills to understand the possible risks and rewards of different choices and how likely they are to happen. Calculating probabilities to figure out the chances of different outcomes so we can make better choices and not rely too much on what we hope will happen. Seeking new information and perspectives to continually update our confidence in a decision outcome. And approaching data with a critical eye towards historical trends, confidence intervals, sample size, base rates, and correlation versus causation. And then the final set of skills, knowledge, and dispositions that make up our framework for effective decision making include structuring decisions. So these don't apply as much to the quick, in the moment decisions that we make all throughout the day, but these are the big decisions where we have the time and the luxury and the ability to sort of sit down and structure out our decisions. A lot of people are familiar with a pro-con list. That is a form of structuring decisions. As it turns out, there are even more effective ways to structure decisions than just the pro-con list, and so we'd want to provide students with additional tools. But if you can think for yourself, like this is something that you would sit down and write out a pro-con list for, those are the kinds of decisions that are included in our structuring decisions domain. And so again, think back to the example we were sharing earlier. It's not about which choice they pick. It's not about even how well it turns out. Instead, it's about, are they demonstrating the skills and the knowledge and the dispositions that are included in these four domains. That's what we talk about when we talk about effective decision making skills. If you're interested in like exactly the nitty-gritty about what is broken down in these four domains, the Alliance for Decision Education offers a set of K-12 learning standards. So for each of those four domains, we have between 5 and a dozen sub-strands where we say these are the specific skills, knowledge, and dispositions that are included or that make up this particular domain. And then it drills down even further. Once you go to one of those standards, you'll see something like this. So this is our CB9 standard, which is about recognizing resisting cognitive biases. And you can see it includes a description of what this is and what we want students to be aware of. And then you can see we break it down by grade level band. And we do this for every single one of the K-12 standards. So you can see, okay, maybe I'm a elementary school teacher or I'm the parent of elementary school age children. What types of skills, knowledge, and dispositions related to the confirmation bias would we want to see in our elementary students? And what would be developmentally appropriate for them versus when they get a little bit older into middle school versus when they get a little bit older into the high school setting? And so, if you're looking for like, okay, where do I begin? How do I start to teach this to my students or my kids? The K-12 standards will give you a good starting point for that. There are two broad decision-making approaches to decision education to sort of be thinking about. One is teaching decision education as a standalone subject. So if in the course of this webinar, you say, I've been convinced this feels like a really important thing for my students to learn, and I want to make sure that my students are good, effective decision makers. I have the K-12 standards, so I know these are all the things that I want my students to be able to do by different grade bands. How do I actually teach this to them? One approach is as a standalone subject. And we are seeing schools across the country do this in a variety of different ways. So there may be some schools that actually create an elective course where their students go to decision making class and they get a lecture in decision making and they get assignments in decision making and they get homework in decision making and they get a grade for how well they did in their decision making class. And they're taught this really explicitly as an elective class. Another way we're seeing this is there's schools that have either advisory time or flex time or study hall or any of these times. And a school may decide to repurpose that time for decision making, perhaps on a particular basis. Or we're working with one school in Chicago where every Monday when their sixth grade students go to advisory period, they're learning decision making in that particular day. You could do it that way. You can say, hey, March is decision making month for us. And so for every day when you go to advisory time in March, you're going to have a decision making lecture. I worked with one teacher who she was a social studies teacher, and every 2 or 3 Fridays, she used to have current events blocked out on her lesson plan. So, in other words, they might have been in the middle of a lesson on the French Revolution or ancient China or whatever. And so they'd be learning that every day. But then when it got to that Friday, they would take a break from what the unit they were on, and they would instead do a current events activity where each kid brought in a piece of information from the news and they would sort of discuss it. Well, for one year, she kept that, but instead of doing current events, she did decision making. And so it was a regular break, every 2 or 3 Fridays she would do it, and students understood it's coming. So it didn't feel like random or, where is it coming from, but it felt there. So all that's to say, there is opportunity for teachers and schools to set up a structure where students are learning this as a standalone subject. But we know that that isn't possible at every school or even desirable at every school. So a lot of schools say, well, we're balancing this with financial literacy and character education and, all of these other subjects in addition to our core subjects. So they may feel like, okay, we can't teach this just as a standalone. There's no wiggle room in the schedule. But those schools may still feel like I actually still see the value in decision education, and I still think my students need to learn this, and I have all the K-12 standards and all of that. And they say can't teach it as a standalone subject. They are able to teach it as integrated subject areas, and we are seeing tons of creative exploration where teachers are teaching cognitive bias in the English classroom because as they read nonfiction text, the text that they're reading is about cognitive bias. Or in biology class, when students are learning about Punnett squares, it's an opportunity to weave in other areas as well. And so, from history to media literacy courses to English to math to science, in any different subject areas, there's ways to infuse the work that your core content is doing and also address some of this decision making skills as well. And the Alliance for Decision Education is here to help you. So, we are a national nonprofit and a field builder. And our goal is to help connect teachers, school leaders, policymakers, researchers, and others, and the general public, parents, guardians, others. To support students in making good, effective decisions. And we have some resources to assist you with this. So, if you were to go to our website, you would see the K-12 standards that I mentioned. You'll also see a tab that includes teaching resources, which we have several lesson plans up available on our website now. We have decision education crosswalks. So if you're an English teacher or a science teacher, like you can see how decision education intersects with your subject area. You also have the ability to request professional learning for your school, district, or organization. And then we have a podcast and blog to learn more about decision making science. So we are here to help you along this journey. As if you feel like this is a really important skill set and you want students to be aware of it, and you need some help to implementing this, we are here to help you with that process and are excited for you to make that happen. I'm going to open it up to questions and discussions at this point, but I hope this was a helpful overview in terms of what decision education is, why it's so crucial that we infuse students with decision-making knowledge, both for their time right now, but also for the rest of their lives, personally and professionally. Understanding the nuance of what it means and doesn't mean to be a good, effective decision maker, what are the skills and subsets that make up effective decision making and how to go about leading this at a school level or at your home. If you have any questions, I would be more than happy to open up the floor now. Feel free to take yourself off mute or you can share any thoughts in the chat, and would love to dialogue with you all. Mark, please, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I mean, we already talked about using history as decision making. Was this really a good idea for Napoleon to go attack Moscow or something like that? And then I guess I can see in English, you have all these things, and then you could go, a lot of them, the excitement is making bad decisions, and the reader can see that. So you could play them back as decision problems, which might be more boring, but you would learn something. And then I don't know, a lot of the word problems could also be framed as decision problems, as far
Yeah, three
like
great
that. Do
examples.
you weave that into, some of your alliance resources or how that can be done?
Yes, yes, you'll see all that weaved in. And I think you gave three great examples. And the first one you mentioned in history classroom, that's a perfect example. And I think it's important to get students to not say, okay, we know how this turned out, right? Like we know that Napoleon going to Moscow did not turn out well for him, right? But let's separate that from the process he used to make that decision. And you could have a really good debate there. And you can talk about risk tolerances and you can, one student might say, I would never do that if I was, like and another might say, you know what? Like I'm willing to roll the dice or, and did he sort of have his head in the sand and he wasn't truth seeking? Or was he aware that, like, okay, you only have a 15% chance of success, but that's worth it to him, and he's gonna go move forward. And that's just one example. But again, it's and then being really explicit with them and saying, what does this mean for you? Now you are not conquering an army, right? Like you are not making decisions that affect billions of dollars and all of these other things, but you're trying to decide which project you're going to do for the science fair, or you're trying to decide, and you're going to have to decide, should you try the physics project that is more risky, but if you can nail that physics project, you can win the whole science competition, or do you play it safe and do, the fake volcano, that we've all seen before? You're going to pass the class, but you're not going to win any awards for it. What's that going to mean? So yeah, your history example was really great, and it's about not necessarily did it turn out well or did it not turn out well, but what was the process that went into there, and that can really engage some students. You also mentioned English, and I love your example too, because I mentioned a nonfiction example, right? Where if you're just like literally reading about cognitive biases, but you mentioned, yeah, how fun would it be if you get a piece of fiction and you analyze, did that character make a good choice? Why or why not? Give me the reasons. And then again, making it explicit, what can we learn from this? What can we pull away from it? And math is such a good connection too. We're working with the state of Tennessee has a new math course that um, I'm very, very energized by. And it's a math class that's specifically for applicability and decision making. So how can they use math skills like expected value, which combines how great something would be with how likely that is to happen, and things like sub skills like that, where they're analyzing whether or not to purchase insurance, they're analyzing just all kinds of like really, really cool, fun things that are happening in the math class that are both a way to understand the decision-making content, but also further understand the content more. And so one thing that we're seeing is even if a a school does have the luxury and the ability to, for example, create a decision-making elective where they're going to teach us as a standalone class, they might also want to infuse it in their classrooms as well. So it's not an either or, because not only will they learn the decision making, but they'll also be more engaged with the history. They'll be more engaged with the English. They will be more engaged with the mathematics when they can apply it there. So thank you, Mark. Three excellent, excellent examples.
Mm.
Okay, Matt asks a great question about, are there any assessment tools that ADE believes might capture the impact of this kind of training, um, even in the professional context? This is an area where the field still needs to be developed in, and we still need to further hone a suite of assessment protocols that we can use. I think there are sort of unofficial things that I've tinkered around with in classrooms that haven't been norms, they haven't been validated, they haven't been tested for reliability, but just to sort of fuel my own curiosity in terms of like, do students have a good thought process or not? There are also like for example, there are tests that determine active open-mindedness. They're available on Google Scholar. There are other tests like that. There are tests you can do to, we talked about thinking probabilistically and some of the numeracy skills. There's tests that you can adequately assess somebody's confidence interval, and are they overconfident or underconfident in their decision. So there are bits and pieces that are available in the scholarly research. I'm not familiar of a single assessment that summarizes all four domains at the student level. I would love to see one, and I hope that the research community is listening to this and will, begin thinking about that. But I think there are things that we can do, and practitioners are tinkering with things now that they can use in sort of the interim. That's a great question, Matt. Thank you for asking it. Mark, please.
I was also thinking, I work with high school students on science fair projects to use statistics and make their science projects better, but also decision analysis, studying bias, or even the probabilistic thinking would make good subjects for science fair projects, and a lot, more doable than a lot of the technical ones. So I don't know if you've thought about encouraging kids in that direction.
I love that idea. Actually, our organization is we're launching a pretty substantial research grant program to people at the professional level who are researching some of the things that we've been talking about today. And I love the idea of a student version of that. And can they conduct research in the field of decision making. That is so fun for me. So yeah, we'll have to flag that for our research team and see if we could do a student research competition. Right. Any other thoughts? Well, I'll hang out a bit. If there are any other thoughts or questions or insights that people have, but hopefully this was a helpful overview in terms of just a crash course into gosh, we can teach students decision making. Like this is something that is important in their lives now and in the future. There's a field of research and studies and skills that we can equip them with, and students get better and they're very interested when they're exposed to some of these things. And it's something that we can empower students with. So um, I hope this has been a helpful overview, and I thank you all so much for your engagement and for learning. I'll follow this session up with an email. We'll ask you to please complete a brief anonymous survey and share everything that you think was good, bad, and we want to hear that. We'll also encourage you to sign up for our newsletter so that you can hear what's going on at the Alliance moving forward. And then I'll also say we have a few more of these lunch and learn specials. They're going to be every Monday in June and July. And so today's concludes June, but next Monday we'll start July. So we've got four more great sessions that we hope that you will consider joining as well. Thank you all very, very much.